All right, hey, we're going to pick up where we left off last one. And so Rome, going over Rome again, we talked about kind of the structure, the history of Rome and the Roman Republic government. And Rome is going to struggle from a situation where you have the haves and you have the have-nots. The rich are going to have all of the social power, they're going to have all of the political power. And Rome is going to be another ancient society that is reliant on slave labor, and so they're going to extract labor from them that either owe them money. The plebeians typically owe the patricians money, or they're going to import slaves to do a large portion of labor. And so the rich are going to live it up in these huge, basically a life of luxury, and the plebeians are going to toil under the weight of holding up this society. And so in 494, the plebeians are like, look, we've had it. They start to organize, and they're like, hey, we're just going to leave. We'll leave Rome, and you guys can just live in the society by yourselves and see how it goes. And this would have been horribly devastating, not only to the economy, but also to the Roman military. And it would have brought to an end the Roman Republic. And so the Senate, in exchange for the plebeians sticking around, create two additional positions called the tribunes. And these men were going to be elected either from the plebeian class, and they could veto some of the actions of the Roman Senate and the councils. And so the common people get a little bit of power with these, right? And then later on, the plebeian council gets created, and by 287 BCE, the plebeian council gets the ability to pass some legislation as long as it's approved by the Senate and the council, right? So we have that, and so the plebeians begin to gain some power in Rome. But overall, as Rome grows in wealth and size, the plebeian class is going to also grow in wealth, and so you're going to have wealthy plebeians that are going to form alliances with patricians, and so the poor plebes are going to be kind of left in the dust again, and the rich, regardless of their patricians or plebeians, are going to hold the most power. One of the major deciding factors if you're going to have power or not in Rome is your ability to hold land. And so soldiers were awarded land holdings after victories. And so in 350 BCE, Roman access law that limits the amount of land that can be given to soldiers. So it's going to increase the amount of land that can be given to individual soldiers instead of military leaders or the wealthy. All right. And so it made it more attractive to serve in the Roman military, because if you went on a campaign that won, you could end up with a nice farm somewhere in Italy or someplace, right? The Roman legion, of course, is very famous. It's a professional army. You would serve in the army for campaign or more years at a time. And if you conquered land, you would be given them. And so we always said the rich had the upper hand because they would join with the other rich plebeians. The patricians would kind of outvote the common plebeians. And as we grow in wealth, the plebeians are able to amass land and wealth are going to overshadow those that can't. So we have that. One of the things that comes about during this time frame is Roman law. And so Rome is actually going to send emissaries to Athens to study Athenian law, and they're going to come back and they're going to write out different types of laws. And so much like the United States, or modern nations, they're going to have private law and public law. And so private is going to be is going to settle disputes between individuals, and public law is going to define this relationship between individuals and the government. And then we're going to have the law of nations that's going to go into how lands that are conquered during Roman conquest are going to be governed, right? So the Roman government is going to write down these laws in the 12 tablets, and they're going to list them for everybody to see. And so everybody can go and study the law, and they know what's there, right? Kind of gives you an idea about like laws about debt and the rights of fathers and lands and those types of things, right? So Rome originally, as they start to expand, they look at the tribes that are outside of Rome, and they kind of just start to encapsulate them, and they're going to form this little Latin league in which Rome is going to be the primary member, but other tribes are going to be allowed to join. And so you have Rome right here, and it's going to start to expand outward and encapsulate other areas, right? The Romans are going to capture the Etruscans and defeat them. In 338, they're going to defeat all of the Latin League and absorb them into Rome. And so they don't necessarily punish them, and it's going to offer citizenship into the Republic without, but they're not going to have voting rights. And so what this is going to allow is other people from Italy or other people from the Latin tribes to join the Roman military and share in some of the spoils. And so Rome is going to be able to extend its military by allowing other Latins to join in. And so as Rome begins to go up to the Etruscans or the other areas around Italy, they will allow them to join in with at least some sort of Roman citizenship. Now, when Rome starts to expand into Gaul and into modern day Germany or into Spain, those rights of citizenship are not going to be offered to those people. Okay. By 280, Rome had taken basically all of Italy, except for the south that was kind of controlled by the Greeks. And we have a Greek, Pyrrhus, who was a Greek king that controlled southern Italy. And so when Rome attacks them, Pyrrhus actually wins two major victories, but it's such a huge cost that he's not able to maintain his land. And so you have something that's called referred to as a Pyrrhic victory, in which a victory actually dispelled, victory in the war actually the battle spells defeat in the war. And so he's famous for saying that one more such victory would surely undo me, right? And so Rome's able to take over Italy and then in Rome and then move. So by 263, all of Italy's under control of the Roman Empire or Roman Republic. We have that. The Romans, obviously, as you're aware, are extremely militaristic and focused on expanding empire. That's one of the ways that they're going to fuel their funding for. I guess I shouldn't use the word empire, because that's what we're going to talk about later after Rome falls under the leadership of emperors. But as the Roman Republic begins to spread, it would fuel the Republic. It would finance the Republic through military conquest. And so, yearly they would attack a different area. They would look to expand and take those areas and the wealth that's in them, right? Roman armies were pretty ruthless and cruel. They would kill and rape and slaughter populations. And they would take thousands and thousands of slaves and either bring them back to Rome to do the labor of the Romans, or they would sell them to neighboring areas. Again, this is just very similar to all of the empires that we've seen to this point, or the governments that we've seen to this point. If you're cruel to people that oppose you and you deal with them militaristically, and you slaughter all the people. The next person you run, the next area you look to put under control might not put up a fight and just surrender to you in exchange for better conditions, right? We talked about greed. The way that a person could advance in Roman society is through their military success. And so if you were a soldier and you were seen as being very brave in battle, then you were going to be rewarded with more plunder from the war, right? And so the patricians in Rome that would serve in the military, excuse me, would look at this as an opportunity to better their family's position and to increase in wealth. Because if you could control more land, then you have the opportunity to control more land or control more wealth. The greatest honor that a Roman could receive in the Roman Republic or even in the Roman Empire that's going to follow is going to be called a triumph. It's basically a huge military parade. So if you're part of a group that goes out and wins a huge victory, and you bring back a bunch of plunder to Rome, you were given this big military parade where you march through the streets of Rome, and the spoils of your conquest are presented to the Roman people. And this honor is reserved for the greatest generals in the armies of those days. And so, you would come through on this golden chariot and have all of your plunder put forth before you. And so when we get into the age of emperors, we'll talk about that a little bit more. The most famous of the Roman conquest are going to happen, or the most famous of the Roman wars probably are going to be the Punic Wars, and they're going to be fought against Rome's greatest adversary of the age, which is Carthage. Carthage is a city that was on the northern coast of Africa, and so it's separated from Rome by the Mediterranean Sea. And so Rome and Carthage would compete economically, but they were kind of separated by that sea militarily, and so they were rivals. And so there was no really reason to fight until two Greek city-states found themselves at war, Syracuse and Messina, and they're fighting over the control of the island of Sicily. And so the Messinans reach out to Carthage for help, and so the Carthaginians send their navy to help them, and then the Messinans also ask for Rome to help, and Carthage feels kind of betrayed by this alliance that they find themselves in which they're on the side of the Romans. And so the Carthaginians switch allegiances, and they end up helping Syracuse. And the Romans help Messina, and this is known as the First Punic War. It happens on the island of Sicily. It lasts for about 20 years. And the Carthaginians and the Syracuse, they actually are victorious. However, they never look to push the battle beyond the island of Sicily. And so, while they're controlling the island of Sicily, Rome kind of goes home and licks its wounds. And so the Romans return to Sicily, and they take Carthaginian land in other places, I suppose, outside of Sicily, and it upsets Carthage. And so Carthage wants revenge for that. So for 20 years, they build up their armies and their resources, and they start to think about how are they going to attack Rome. And so the way that they're going to do this is, instead of sailing across the Mediterranean Sea, they're just going to march across northern Africa and hook over the Straits of Gibraltar into Spain, and then come back around, right? There's the Celts that live in Western Europe during this time that don't like the Romans anyways. They see the Romans as a threat to their society, which Rome actually is. And so they serve in the army of Carthage. And this second army is the second Carthaginian army is led by probably one of the greatest military minds of all time, and that's going to be Hannibal. And so Hannibal is going to launch this major invasion of Rome right around 218 BCE. And instead of sailing into Rome, he's going to march across the Italian Alps. And so one of the cool things that he does during this time frame is he has access to elephants, which was a huge advantage in war. obviously, because elephants are these huge animals. And so so Hannibal and a 60,000 men, they march through the Alps. They they accomplish huge engineering feats to accomplish this, and they defeat really any Roman army that they run into. And so Hannibal is victorious in battle after battle after battle, but the Romans never acknowledge defeat. They don't sue for peace. They just retreat further and further and further down the Italian peninsula. And so Rome begins to kind of change some of their tactics. Instead of facing Hannibal in open combat, they begin to attack in smaller groups, like hit and run techniques, like what we would consider like guerrilla warfare today. And so Rome had always been, the Romans have a very distinct idea of what a Roman's supposed to be, and they're supposed to be courageous and trustworthy. And so like these hit and run techniques kind of they kind of go against, I suppose, what Rome wants to vision themselves as. And so Fabius Maximus was the general that was in charge of this, and he gets this bad nickname, I suppose, as being the delayer. Like he's delaying major combat, and so they refer to him as Fabius the Delayer. And he's not well received in Rome. But then when Rome would ever engage Hannibal in actual military combat, they would be defeated. So in 207 BCE, the Romans switch, and they switch military leadership, and they give Scipio an army. And so instead of fighting Hannibal directly, what Scipio does is he starts to attack Hannibal's supply lines in Spain. And so he's successful there because he's not facing the might of Hannibal's main army, right? And so then Scipio decides that he's going to, instead of attacking Hannibal in Italy, what he's going to do is he's going to try to draw Hannibal back into North Africa. And so he changes his tactics from attacking Spain to going to attack Carthage itself. And so when Carthage is under threat, Hannibal has to return his troops back to North Africa, and he's defeated by Scipio in 202 BCE. And so because of this this military victory, Scipio is given the title of Scipio Africanus, which just basically means the conqueror of Africa. And so one of the honors the Romans would bestow on people is they would give the name of some of the conquest. And so Scipio Africanus again means conqueror of Africa. So Scipio comes back, he has this triumph, and Rome goes through this period of this uneasy peace between Rome and Carthage. Like Carthage is still there, but it's weakened in power, and Hannibal goes on to pass away, and he's no longer a factor. And so Rome keeps calling for the destruction of Carthage. In fact, one of the prominent senators of the era, Cato the Elder, with every speech, when he would give a speech at the Roman Senate, would end his speech with the line, "And Carthage must be destroyed." And so you can imagine him giving some sort of speech about like tax reform or whatever, and ending with it. And that's why I think why this tax reform should be considered by the Senate. Oh, and Carthage must be destroyed. So it's kind of fun. So in 149 BCE, Rome sets out just to destroy Carthage, and they put together an invasion fleet. They sail across the Mediterranean, and they lay waste to Carthage. They kill or they enslave all the people of Carthage. They destroy the city. There's a Roman myth that the soldiers actually sow sea salt into the fields around Carthage to make the fields infertile, so they wouldn't grow crops again, and they get rid of Carthage. Somewhere between 201 and 140 BCE, Rome turns its attention to Greece and they conquer Greece. And while the Romans had always kind of held Greece and Greek culture in high esteem, they looked down upon the government institutions of Greece, like democracy. You know, we in America, we live in a democratic republic, in which we representative democracy, in which we elect people to act on our behalf. And you look at Congress or state governments or whatever, and democracy is kind of messy because, you know, it's slow and you got to get lots of people on board or whatever. And so the Romans don't necessarily appreciate that, but what they do appreciate is Greek culture. And so with the conquest of Greece and Carthage, Rome is really the major player now in the Mediterranean. They control basically the northern coast, or what would that be? The southern. They control the northern coast of Africa, which is the southern coast of the Mediterranean. Obviously, they control the Italian peninsula. They control Greece, and they control most of the Mediterranean world. And so Rome had obviously taken on a lot of Greek culture, the ideas of architecture and culture. The Romans take on a lot of the Greek gods and they just rename them. And so, you know, Zeus becomes Jupiter, and Hades becomes Pluto, which is the god of war, and Apollo keeps his name. And you go through there, and so the Romans just rename everybody. But what the Romans do is they keep this idea of Greek culture alive, but they also infuse a lot of their sets of virtues. And so, you know, Rome is strong and honest and straightforward and powerful. And so, like when we were fighting Hannibal, the Romans were fighting Hannibal, and those hit and run techniques, they thought that was dishonorable. They weren't straightforward and powerful, and they weren't going to just take the main military thrust of Hannibal. And so somehow or another that was wrong. And they looked down upon the Greeks as being untrustworthy and shifty. And this idea of political organization and democracy was somehow, disdainful to Roman culture. And so overall, the biggest idea of what it means to be a Roman was Rominatus, which means that you were civilized and strong, and you were this great public speaker and this great warrior, right? And probably the greatest example of this would be, you know, when you were elected, if you were elected, given the honor of being dictator of Rome, when Rome was facing a major conflict, you would give that power up because you were honest. You know, you worked within this political structure. And so, you serve the greater good of Rome, and then you would step aside. And even when we get into the Roman Empire here in the next week, you'll see the Roman emperors that keep this idea of Rominatus, that build public works for everybody, and kind of share in the glory with everybody, not just contain it to themselves. They're viewed very positively as good emperors. And the bad emperors, like Caligula, Caligula was all about himself, and so he is seen as negative. Or Nero, who was kind of corrupt, who was corrupt, are seen negatively because they don't share this value of Rominatus, right? Rome takes on some of the ideas of Greek philosophy, specifically Stoicism. And Stoics basically are they're very strong and silent, and they don't get tied up into emotions. And so, Roman warriors or Roman leaders are very stoic. They don't say a lot. They don't talk just to talk. Kind of, again, think of them kind of as this Clint Eastwood type figure when they do this. And so we look at Rominatus, and they're going to build temples and forums or aqueducts or roads for the betterment of Rome. And they're not just always compiling riches to better themselves. And the rich would often pay for huge, festivals and games, and provide free food and drink and public entertainment to everybody. And this was an expression of loyalty to Rome and this shared culture that everybody has. So, hey, even though I have a lot of money, I'm going to give back. And so that's kind of this idea of Rome, right? The main political power of Rome lies in this idea of clientage, in which we would form a powerful person would basically form a network of people underneath him that owe some sort of debt, political debt to them. And so you would you would work with other patricians or other plebes to ensure that, hey, this person was going to be given some sort of a government contract to build roads, or to build some sort of public building, and the patrons would, in exchange for that, the patrons would expect political support. And so if you could amass kind of a grassroots organization to prop you up, that was a way to advance in Roman politics. And so the elite families would be the patricians, they would be the head, and then other patricians or other plebeians that were underneath them would kind of prop them up. And so we'll see that even when we get into the fall of the Roman Empire, with Caesar and the first triumphant, when it takes three leaders to kind of come together and form this power. So your average plebeian, kind of gets overshadowed in this because they don't have a lot to offer. Because again, the plebeian assembly is going to be I would say corrupted by this idea of wealth and patricians. And so basically what they would do is they would, in reality, they would serve the interests of the rich. The Romans would rely on these citizens to form the army, and do these, but your average plebeian, is really just kind of a poor farmer that maybe serves in the military, maybe gets a little bit of land, but he and his family are not going to advance in Roman society. And so as the rich become richer, they're going to buy up lands from the plebeians, and common people are going to be forced off their lands. Slavery was common in Roman society, and so the rich would have huge plantations in which the slaves would grow the food, which would be a form of wealth for the rich. In war times, when slaves were taken, it was slaves were these prisoners of war were reappointed to different areas under Roman control as slaves. And so at the height of the Roman Republic, about 30% of the Roman population was slaves. Slavery really kind of undermines this idea of Roman productivity and innovation, because if you have a huge labor force that's willing to basically work for nothing, you don't need to innovate. And we talked about this with Greece a little bit, with the Greeks able to come up with a very rudimentary steam engine, but it never comes into fruition because there's no need for steam power when you have you have the unpaid labor of slaves. And so if you have free labor, you don't have to innovate to make new stuff. And so during the Roman Republic, you see this great expansion of territory and great expansion of control. And you see great public works, aqueducts and roads that are still used to this day, but you don't see innovation. And so for 1,000 years, society doesn't really innovate during that time. Roman society is going to see a lot of slave uprisings that are going to be put down by the Roman military. Probably the The most famous is going to happen in 73 BCE. It's going to be led by a warrior slave by the name of Spartacus that's going to lead the slaves of Rome in an uprising. I'm sorry, a gladiator slave, right? And the gladiators are going to revolt. And so to put down this, Cracus, who was the head of the Roman military at that point, is going to round up 6,000 slaves, and he's going to crucify them on the roads leading into Rome. And so, I mean, you just picture how many crosses that would be, just lining the street, lining the roads that come into Rome, and slaves just being killed publicly as a symbol of the power of Rome during that time frame. Gender roles, obviously you have rich and poor. It's going to change a lot, but women in Rome are going to experience a greater sense of independence than other societies around. They could they retain ownership of their dowries. So whatever they came into the marriage with, they would own. They could sue for divorce if their husband died. They would actually receive the inheritance. And so, like, if your husband passed away and you were a widow, you could become a fairly powerful woman in the fact that you could maintain property and land, and you could run your own household outside of a man. And so Roman women were definitely at a better place than the Greek women, who, if their husband died, they would have to marry another family member. And so let's just stop it there. Kind of break this up because this is a long chapter again. And so, we'll look at Roman, the end of the Roman Republic here, but you can kind of see, hopefully you can kind of see where we're going, where the poor or the plebeians, they don't have a whole lot of power. They start to form a little bit of a political footprint with the plebeian assembly, and then that kind of gets manipulated over time as wealthy plebes start to work with the patricians and the other elite Roman families, and to better their position. And so you have this situation where in Rome you have the very wealthy that kind of have political power and a say in society, where if you don't have money, you're definitely left on the outside looking in. And so we'll come back and we'll talk about how the Roman Republic comes to an end and ends up being the Roman Empire. So hopefully we picked up a little bit there, and I will see you guys here in just a second. Bye-bye.